Okay, so remember you can pause this video whenever you need to. Take a minute, set up a piece of paper so you can take notes. This will be B7E. So let me get my paper right here. So B7E, this is, what unit is this, 7?
Yes.
Unit 7, Evolution 2, period 4, and is this Thursday?
Yes, ma'am.
12:10. All right, so we have B7F. It's B7F. Yes. Sorry, it's B7F, not B7E. Thank you, guys. So you're going to analyze other evolutionary mechanisms. Okay? So we've talked about natural selection. We've talked about how that works. We've talked about biogeography. We've talked about how you can have geographical barriers. You can have behavioral isolation that's going on. So now we're going to talk about some other ones. So you're going to analyze, again, look for trends and patterns, other evolutionary mechanisms including, okay, let me fix this here. So it's going to stay there. So this is what my page is looking like. I don't have a whole lot on here. Okay. Including genetic drift, which is a weird one. Genetic drift is basically like just accidental stuff. Genetic drift, gene flow, which we've talked a little bit about. Mutation, we talked a little bit about mutation already. And recombination, we also talked about that a little bit. Okay, so we're not going to worry so much about natural selection. We're going to worry about some other things that are happening that is incorporated in this whole theory of evolution. How is evolution occurring here? So the first one we're going to talk about is genetic drift. Okay, genetic drift is random. It's just a random change in genes or the gene pool. Just accidental. Not a mutation necessarily, but just a random one. Like these animals were living in a cave, these bats are in a cave, and there was a cave-in. And so it killed half the bats that were, most of those bats were the ones that could withstand cooler temperatures. They were farther back in the cave. And so it killed off those ones that could withstand cooler temperatures. So only the ones that could not withstand the cooler temperatures survived. So you had a shift in genes, and it was just a random accidental thing that happened. So you've got a random change in genes. And I'm going to put another one, or the gene pool. Or the gene frequency. Which genes are present, which ones are most there. I'm using all these phrases. So something happens, kills off a bunch of them that had a particular, they were kind of grouped together, so they had a particular gene, and so that changed the gene frequency. If you went back the day after it happened, you'd find that, oh hey, all the ones that had the red dot on their ear are gone. You know, they were kind of clumped together and they were actually there. So you changed your gene frequency. The gene frequency of the red dot on the ear showing up is changed. The percentages of which ones have that has changed because there was just this random accident that occurred here. So this random change in genes, the gene pool, the gene frequency, it tends to decrease a species' genetic diversity. This is a big one. You need to know this. So genetic drift tends to decrease a species' genetic diversity. So I'm just going to put tends to decrease diversity. Because a lot of times the like organisms will tend to group together, especially if it's a response to temperature or something along those lines. And so when that random accident happens, it kills off a lot of them that are like. So they tend to get killed off in clumps like that. So It's just going to ultimately decrease the diversity. So genetic drift is something that happens. It's random, accidental things, and it can change the gene pool that's there. It can change the genetic diversity, and usually it's going to decrease that diversity because generally speaking, you're killing off some of the organisms, so their genes are no longer being put into the pot, into the gene pool. So an example, a disaster kill happens and kills off 90% of all the organisms in a population. It could be also any tons of different things that can happen. If you kill off 90% of them in that population, and that doesn't mean that they're going to go extinct. It just means that particular population, you have just decreased or reduced the variation in the gene pool. Because there aren't as many organisms. You don't have as many genes to pull from. There's not as much variation. So you've reduced the gene pool, so there aren't as many genes. There aren't as many organisms, so there aren't as many genes there. The different things, the different variations that are there. And the variation. Okay, if you look at variation in the high school, let's do some more personality variations. Let's say you have, tell me some groups that are in high school. What social groups are there?
Emos.
The emos, what else? We have emos here?
Yes.
Really? Really? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. We have emos, what else?
The jocks.
The jocks, what else?
The popular fake people.
The popular fake people, the preppies. The what?
Spanish.
The Spanish, what else? The what? The normal kids, the what?
The fun people.
Preps?
The fun people.
The country people.
Okay, so let's say, and don't they all hang together?
No.
No. Then how can they be pods and groups if they don't hang together?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The Evas and the jocks.
Yeah. Don't they hang? Yeah. Okay, so they have their own little groups that they hang with, right? Okay, so let's say something happens and there's a tornado. Sports. Into sports. Yeah, so let's say the athletes. Let's say we have a tornado and there's a big athletic thing going on and it wipes out all the athletes.
Oh, that's sad.
It is a sad day
most
at
of the
Borger
school
High.
died.
Now, doesn't that change our gene pool? Now we have all the people who aren't athletics. That would be the klutzy people, right? The ones that are not so athletically inclined. So we just changed our gene pool, didn't we? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. It's just some random thing. And you usually have like stuff together in many cases. Even within a population, you have like groups together. Family pods where they have those characteristics that are there. And so when some random accident happens, it tends to wipe out a lot. Sometimes it can wipe out, most of the school. Let's say it wiped out everything but the freshman wing. Yeah, we would have a big, huge section that's gone. And so we changed drastically the gene pool. And we reduced the number of variations because just having fewer organisms is going to lower the variation, right? There aren't as many differences. Fewer people mean there typically aren't as many differences there. That's what genetic drift is talking about. Because there's some random weird thing that happens and kills off a lot of them, the gene pool, the gene frequency will drift, will change from what it was. Did you guys get that? Okay, the next one that's incorporated in evolution that we haven't really talked about much is gene flow. Now, we've talked a little bit about it because I'm going to put in here migration because we talked a little bit about migration, didn't we? Okay, when they move from one family group to another. So gene flow is a transfer of genetic material. And remember, we're talking about sex here, right? The genetic material is in the sperm and the egg. So we're talking about a change. You're moving from one area to another. So we've got a transfer of genetic material, and that's going to be variation from one population to another. Changing herds. Think about this. When we talked about those massive herds on the savannah, on the plains of Africa, you see these great discovery videos on there, and they're not all. They seem to be all one herd, but they're not really all one group. They have their sections, their pods. Well, when you talk about gene flow, one of the organisms from this little family group over here is going to move to another family group over here, and they swap genes. Again, it's also what we talked about in class, where you're not marrying within your family, are you? We hope that doesn't happen. Your genes are going to be mixed with another population, another gene flow. So again, that's called gene flow. Those genes are not staying in one localized area, they're spreading out here. So an example would be, and again, we don't use humans as the best examples because we kind of mess things up. But if you change groups within a herd, again, think of those huge, vast herds there. Prairie dogs moving to a different prairie dog town. Not all of them move, but some of them will. They call them little towns, right? Prairie dog town. So we have gene flow. The genes are going to flow from one large group within a population to another. They can even flow from one large population to another large population if they move around. When we talk about the zoos here in the U.S., it's actually not just the zoos in the U.S. that actually share things and trade stuff. It's all over the world. So when we have pandas, we have limited numbers of pandas, right? They were on the endangered species list. I'm not sure if they are anymore. But we would have pandas. We didn't want inbreeding. So we would have pandas from China come over here, and then we would have pandas from the San Diego Zoo, and we would make those and have offspring so that we could kind of mix the genes and have gene flow that way. And so a lot of times in zoos, you'll see they purposely make sure that there's not inbreeding that occurs within their organisms. And they keep track of it. So especially when you talk about endangered species, they keep track of where all the organisms are. So it's kind of like we're kind of artificial selection, but we're actually trying to mimic evolution, natural selection. We're not trying to get characteristics that we think are cute. We're trying to get characteristics that are healthy for nature. And that's just trying to get that species to bump up the number so that they can survive. Okay, the next thing on here, and we already talked about this a little bit, mutation. A mutation is the permanent change in the DNA. And usually, mutations increase variation. I'm going to go back up one to the gene flow here. This is also going to increase variation. Genetic drift doesn't increase variation. That's the one where we tend to kill off a lot of stuff. But these two increase variation. This one decreases diversity or variation. So I'm going to put down here decrease variation. I'm going to use the same word on each one. Diversity, variation, same thing, right? Yes, no? You guys get that? Okay. Okay, the fourth and last one is recombination. We talked about this a little bit too. When you have the formation of sex cells, they can create new combinations. So not every single sperm cell from a person has the exact same combination of chromosomes in it. Okay? So it's all got one of the number ones, one of the number twos, and so on and so on. But because of crossing over, remember we talked a little bit about crossing over, because of independent segregation on the chromosomes, each one varies a little bit of difference there. So you have a new combination due to crossing over. And that's, again, crossing over is when the chromosomes swap pieces of themselves, when they're getting ready to split into each of the sex cells. So the crossing over on chromosomes. And independent assortment. Of the chromosomes. Sorry. So again, this is going to increase variation. Again, I'm going to put the word diversity here. Diversity and variation, they're the same basic thing. The only other thing I want to add to this, and it's kind of separate, it's kind of an aside here, the gene pool. When we say that word, that phrase gene pool, all we're talking about is all the possible genes in a population. So what are all the genes? Well, within this one classroom, we have brown eyes, we have blue eyes. Do we have green? Anybody green? Green eyes, hazel eyes? Yeah. So we have 4 different colors of eyes in here. Within this population, do we have anyone with freckles? Freckles? No freckles in here? Okay, we have 1. Okay, so we have gene pool, we have freckles in the gene pool. What about dimples? Dimples? We have dimples in the gene pool. And we talked about this too, the widow's peak. Anybody in here? Widow's peak? Yeah, so we have those. So that would be part of our gene pool. We have those things. Okay, you guys know what a widow's peak is?
Yeah.
Somebody has a widow's peak. Show your hair like this. So who said they had a widow's peak? No, you're not. You don't want to show your hair? Okay, so this is an exaggeration of it. You know how Dracula's hair comes down to a point? That's like that, only it's way exaggerated like that. It usually is pretty, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this is what the gene pool is talking about. Just all the genes in a population. All right? Okay. Let's stop this. Say goodbye to the people online.
Bye.